Bonjour, bonjour everyone. I hope you can hear me. My name is Linda Witt. I'm the president of the Fédération des Alliances Françaises USA. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's session. I'm going to drag my feet for a couple of minutes while everyone arrives and gets settled into the room. But I also wanted to present my co-worker on this project, and that is Melissa Sora. So Melissa, why don't you come on camera and say hi?
Bonjour tout le monde.
Okay, Melissa is based in Washington, D.C., and I'm based in Oregon. So we've got both coasts of the United States. And then, of course, when we have Susan here in a few minutes, she'll be zooming in from Paris. So let's go ahead and get started with some background announcements first. Melissa, if you'll bring up that, yeah, we'll have a slide presentation for you. You are in the right place, everyone, if you're expecting to be talking with Susan Herrmann Loomis of PLAT DU JOUR. And the next slide. We want to take this time to remind you of some other events that are coming soon. One is next Friday, and that's in English, like today's event will be in English. That is on a fascinating story of a stolen Renoir in World War II. And then about a week after that, we have a presentation in French with one of the world-renowned experts in the Olympic Games, and that is Eric Monin. And then midweek, the following week, we have our Apéro National, where we have about 150 people that join on Zoom to speak French at the intermediate and advanced levels. And then after that, we have a little bit later in May, mid-May, we have Janet Skesley and Charles, who is the author of the bestseller, The Paris Library. And then switching back to French, we will have in May Charles Coulon, who will talk about Le Métro dans les Arts. So this time he'll be focusing his series on the arts in the metro. Next slide, please. As far as our logistics today, we're going to ask everyone to stay on mute during the presentation so that everybody has a nice auditory experience. We will encourage you to use the chat feature, and both Melissa and I will be looking in there to bring your questions up to Susan. We will also have a dedicated question and answer period toward the end of the session today. We would suggest that you stay on speaker view so that you can get the best advantage or view of the speakers at the time. We do remind you that on the screen shares, because we will have a few photos that we're showing during the presentation, you can resize the images and have the speaker side by side with the image. And then, because this is relatively new technology and sometimes things happen, if there are any technical issues, just sign back in after a couple of minutes using the original Zoom link. And then this event today is being recorded, so if you have any issues with that, then now's the time to sign off. And our total runtime will be just about an hour. Next slide, please. And now it's my great honor to introduce our speaker today. Susan Herrmann Loomis is an award-winning author with 14 books to her credit. She is professionally trained. She is a professionally trained chef and has run her own cooking school in France for, I believe, 2 decades. She also writes for many newspapers and magazines, including New York Times and Bon Appetit, and she has been featured on major news and cooking shows. I just found out a couple of minutes ago that she'll be on KATU very shortly here in the Pacific Northwest. And then some of the folks in the audience today know Susan from when she lived here in the Pacific Northwest in her childhood, and from her most recent presentation here in Portland, which was in 2015 BC, before COVID. Susan has traveled extensively in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia to research her books, and always keeping in mind the people, the traditions, and the terroir behind the food. Her connection with France is particularly strong, as we'll hear about today. She initially moved to France in the early 1980s to study cooking. She returned to live in France again in 1993, and she opened up her school in 2001, her school in Normandy in 2001. And today, Susan is coming to us from her home in Paris. So thank you, Melissa. You can take down the slides and we'll cut over to Susan, and welcome to you from Paris then. Now, have we unmuted just Susan?
Oh, I was frightened. J'avais peur d'être mutée. I don't know how you say muted in French. Thank you, Linda, for such a lovely welcome. I'm delighted to be with you all tonight.
Okay, great. Well, then, if you're ready, we'll get going with the questions.
I'm ready.
Tell us, Susan, what is plat du jour, and where does the notion originate in France?
Plat du jour, it literally translates as dish of the day. And it actually goes back to the farm, back to the rural landscape where the farm cook, always a woman, would go to the basse-cour or go to the field or go to the garden, the potager, and find what was good that day and then take it home and prepare it. And if you fast forward several centuries, really, that's the plat du jour of today in France. The title is used in every restaurant, brasserie, cafe. But it's always linked to the season and always linked to the terroir.
Okay, great. And what gave you the idea to write this particular plat du jour book?
Well, I'm really linked to the farm and producers and the farm recipes and the traditions of France. And, when you go to a restaurant in France, you sit down and there's a formule which is offered, and the plat du jour is the star. So you can either have a first course and a plat du jour, or a plat du jour and a dessert. And I'm living in Paris for the last 2 years and walking around the plat du jour, my mouth is watering all day long. And I'm thinking, wait, these are the cornerstones of French cooking, these plat du jour. Many of them I explored in French farmhouse cooking, and the whole link started happening. And I thought, well, what I really want to do now is interview chefs and find out what their plat du jour is. Or, really what I did is I got on my bicycle and I rode around the city many, many times to find out what were the plat du jour in different arrondissements. Because Paris is kind of a reflection of the regions of France. Each arrondissement is kind of linked to a region. And I had so much fun, and I came up with some familiar dishes that we all know and love, which I presented in this book in a very simple fashion so that they actually can be made without having to read 45 pages of text. And then I have a lot of more contemporary plat du jour. So I really wanted to place that movement, that daily changing dish.
Yeah, I noticed that as I was going through the book. If I'm not mistaken, there was it the Happy Toast recipe was from a woman in the 12th arrondissement. And exactly. I thought that was fascinating. Yeah.
And the 12th is a very bohemian. It used to be the 11th and 12th were always the artisan arrondissement. So this little tiny restaurant is totally bohemian, totally fabulous food. And I think it's always very important. I'm a journalist, so I like to document things. And I love documenting what's happening in French food, because too many people want to say it's boring, it never changes, blah, blah, blah. It does all the time.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I really enjoyed that, tying some of the recipes to different arrondissements. Now, how does this book compare with your other books?
Well, the link, which I kind of already mentioned, French Farmhouse Cookbook is all about me going to farms and interviewing farmers. And I've done 3 of those farm themed books. And this book is a very contemporary book. And part of it is the subject, which talks about, I wanted to get people in the kitchen making these fabulous dishes, not having to spend all day. So I've had to change my methods too. And Julia Child was a friend of mine, and I grew up cooking through her book, which is wonderful, but we don't need to get that complicated now because our knowledge has increased. So this book is simple, it's vibrant, it's got photos in it for one thing, and it's founded in history and founded in place, but I think it's, the dishes are lively. I think the dishes are what people want to cook today.
Mm-hmm. And so is that who you were thinking of then when you wrote the plat du jour? Is that everybody that's struggling to get a meal out to their families?
Well, I mean, this book was long submitted before we ever were confined, but as it happens, it is the book for the moment. And I just, as a teacher in my school for 20 years, my goal is to get people to cook and succeed. So this book is destined to many of my students, or, I always use my students as representative. Knowledge of cooking, don't want to spend all day, need clear instruction, want clear instruction, and want to place a recipe in its tradition or its history, to give it more depth.
Yeah, and then speaking of teaching, Melissa just put up a slide that shows what I think has got to be a very popular section of your book is that after every recipe, you have an astuce section, which is French for tips, right?
Yes, personally, I can't live without astuce. And when I'm teaching, I'm always thinking when I'm writing a recipe, I'm thinking, okay, what would I be doing in the classroom kitchen? So an astuce amplifies the instructions. And it's like the little tip, like, oh God, I should have, let's see, for the rabbit dish, it's talking about in the US, you might only find frozen rabbit, but the astuce is find a local chef and see if she or he can get you a fresh one. Little astuce that make you think, oh, that's going to make that easier or possible.
Yeah. And sometimes those tie in with the historical aspects too that you just mentioned. And I have to say that I am really enjoying the historical information in the book. When I read about your chapter about the gougère, and I've always thought that French people are a little bit odd about their gougère, because whenever they would tell me I was going to be sampling their gougère, they would say, these are for sure going to be the best gougère that you've ever eaten in your life. And I just couldn't understand why people got so passionate about these gougères. But then in your book, I learned that they date from as far back as the 1300s. So did you have fun doing that historical research? How did you do that?
You know what? I love researching the history of French gastronomy, and I actually got yanked into it about 5 years ago when I was asked to teach a course to college students for a semester abroad, which I did for 3 years. And, when you learn French cooking, it is so tied to history. You can't not learn about gastronomic history. But, I had to delve into it. I had to keep kids busy for, 4 months, 3 hours a week. And I just learned so much. But, working on books throughout my career, I've always been very interested in any kind of background that would popularize or give people a personal connection. So yes, I love researching historical tidbits. And gougère, you are absolutely right. But any French dish, and you can, a fight can break out over whose is the best, whose mother's is the best.
Oh, that is great. Now, I have my favorite anecdote from the book, but what is your favorite anecdote in Plat du Jour?
Well, there's a recipe that I adore in this book, and it's basically potatoes that are boiled with garlic and then crushed, and then you put a poached egg in it, and it's a soup stew. Very simple. Many of the recipes in this book and many Plat du Jour are peasant dishes. They are economical, and this dish is economical, but it happened to be a favorite of King Henry IV, who adored garlic. I mean, he was a baby and his nurse would rub garlic on his lips to keep away witches, and he grew up loving it. And his first mistress said to him, "Sire, you smell like a dead bird because of what you eat." And I just thought, don't you love it? He did not have her head cut off.
Okay, and was that King Henry IV then?
Yeah, not the eighth. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I think Melissa just put up a slide showing a little bit of the history that you put in there about him as related to the poule au pot.
Well,
right.
Henry IV was a gourmand, as many kings were, but he was very dedicated to making sure the people in his realm ate well, and he ate a poulet de Bresse, which even way back then was a gift. Today it's untouchable price-wise. Back then it was already gaining a reputation. He tasted it and he said, "Everyone in my kingdom will have a chicken in their pot." And that is the origin of the dish poule au pot, which is boiled chicken with vegetables. But when you make it correctly, à la Française, it is stunning.
Okay, and then backing up just a little bit, can you explain, we had a question from the chat, explain what are gougères?
Oh dear, apologies for not doing that right away. They are little cheese puffs. So it's pâte à choux, which is an eggy, buttery pastry, very easy to make, but somewhat daunting if you've never made them, but make them because they're easy and fun and impressive. And they're flavored with cheese, and they're from Burgundy. So when you go to Burgundy and you're served a kir, which is usually, it's white wine with blackcurrant syrup in it, you always are served gougère. They're an amuse-bouche appetizer, and they're very impressive to make. And there is much, you know, you have to make a darn good gougère if you want to serve them to French people, let me tell you. The ones in the book are fantastic. I just made them recently and they're really good. It's like eating cheese flavored air.
Yeah, it's one thing I think is really interesting about gougère is that they're deceptively light, but it's very hearty food, really.
Oh, you know, French food is hearty food, I have to say. You know, a French person will describe a dish as being light if it has sauce, because to them, a heavy dish has lots of butter in it. Cream is not heavy.
Ooh. And then do you have, moving on with our questions, do you have a favorite person that you met while working on Plat du Jour?
Oh, that's hard. Yeah, you know, I'm just always so delighted that people will talk to me about food. And of course they will, but I, you know, I don't know a lot of chefs in Paris, so I would just kind of go knocking on the door or, you know, call somebody. And one of my favorite people is the owner of the Select Cafe. So the Select is a throwback to the 30s, even before. But, you know, Hemingway, everybody was at the Select. It's across from the La Coupole. So they'd go dancing at La Coupole and go to the Select for champagne. And he was absolutely wonderful when I explained what I was doing. He's like all over it, you know, and we have a rendezvous at the restaurant and I meet the chef and he brings up his wild mushrooms to show them to me. And then they make me an omelet. And they welcome me back with the photographer to take a photograph. I mean, you know, you really, it's just so generous because these are busy people.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I'm going to segue for just a minute. You know, I've noticed your French is really, really good. And I wonder if you ever took classes at the Alliance Française.
Mais oui, bien sûr. Je suis arrivée à Paris après 8 ans d'études de français, but I could not speak a word. You know, I was too intimidated by all these French people. So I went to the Alliance Française and I was still too intimidated. But yes, of course, I know the address well.
Oh, good. And I think if I'm not mistaken, you got your earlier foundation in the language at the Alliance Française of Chicago, right?
No. Honestly, I grew up in many different places around the world because my father was in the military, and every school I went to, they taught me French. So okay. I'm not saying I was an avid student. It was a required subject. Honestly, 3 children under the age of 7 were the ones who forced me to speak French. When I lived in Paris.
Well, I'm glad you told me you walk every day by the Alliance Française.
I do.
That's so great that you took classes there on Boulevard.
I have some memories, you know, I do. Yeah. Of total intimidation. Yes.
Okay. All right. And back to our main subject today. How do you see, Susan, French cuisine changing? How does it evolve in your view?
It's a rapidly evolving cuisine, and it is subject to trends like any cuisine. And you know, I just read an article because people want to poo-poo French cuisine and say it's stuck and it's this and that. It is not. And the French are fascinated with everything American, but they now are fascinated with everything Asian, everything you know, North African. So we've, you know, the North African influence has been here a long time. I mean, the French went out to colonize, and the only thing they allow back into their country is the cuisine, let me tell you. But many American influences, you know, we have burger joints, we have pancake houses, not thousands, but every cafe menu has a burger on it. But more refined than that, I would say, is the Asian influence that makes its way into the palace and the more refined foods, but even in a cafe menu, you might find that. But the other thing that's wonderful about French food are the younger chefs who are just saying, you know, my grandmother made me this dish. It was my favorite thing. I'm gonna make it, but I'm gonna up its game. And they make it simpler and they make it more contemporary. Mm-hmm. So there are lots of influences in French cuisine.
And you mentioned the Asian influence. Are there other influences that have an impact on today's Plat du Jour?
Well, I would say honestly, Japanese and French have always had this kind of commingling, and it's still there very much. But Thai cuisine is very big here, not the spicy type, because the French will not eat anything very spicy. But you'll go to maybe a French cafe and you might find a soba noodle in somewhere, or you might find nem, which is a spring roll. Mm-hmm. Or trying to think of some other influences. You find cilantro, which is kind of North African also, or lime juice sprinkled on something, or so there's subtle influences.
Interesting.
And the burger, of course, is there are burgers with foie gras and burgers with camembert and burgers with everything.
So it's not the typical American hamburger.
Oh no, I mean they're like 3 miles high and they're raw. The French like raw, their meat very rare.
Okay, well that's definitely a major change from ours then.
Yeah.
And then how would you say that our home cooks in France, are they influenced by other cuisines, or is it just reserved for chefs?
No, it's very much getting into homes. And I think really the Asian influences, because people are realizing in France that the Asian influence is quite light, quite sprightly and simple and not expensive. And I would say that that's a big influence. We also have a frozen food chain here called Picard, and they are on top of every food trend. So they do a lot of Asian influenced foods, and people, especially in the city, go to Picard and buy their dinner and take it home. I mean, I would say the Parisians, they do cook at home, and especially now they cook at home, but they have tended in the past to buy a lot of prepared meals, either from the charcuterie or from Picard.
Mm-hmm. I think you could probably explain Picard a little bit more, Susan. I don't think a lot of us Americans know what it's about. I did see an article the other day in the paper, I think it might have been the New York Times, about Picard, and it talked about how French people will buy things from Picard, but then if they're having friends over for dinner or something, they'll definitely get rid of the wrappings from Picard so that people won't know. Can you speak a little bit to, because it just seems to me, it seems like a contradiction that we hear about, the wonders of French cuisine and then realize that much of it is frozen from Picard.
Well, to say much of it is no, but I would say there's a certain generation. They're young people on the move, they're busy. And Picard is an amazing company. I've researched it for another project I was working on. They have very high quality frozen meals. They have high quality frozen ingredients. I wouldn't cut dead buying something from Picard, but cooking is my life. And I would honestly say from that Picard hits the 30 to 45 generation. No, 25 to 45 generation. Pre-kids, lots of activity, lots of going out, and then you come home and you defrost Picard, but it is high quality stuff. Their appetizers are tasty, their main dishes, I've actually never had a main dish, but their appetizers are tasty. The problem with anything like that is you're eating the same appetizers at everybody's house. But I honestly don't really want to mention the big C, but I think the last year and a half of confinement has changed people enormously in that they are cooking more here. Sales of magazines with recipes is up. People are going insane with boredom, so they're cooking just like everywhere. So I don't know what Picard's, what their chiffre d'affaires is doing, but I would doubt that it's skyrocketed.
Yeah. Well, and then I found interesting when I was visiting Villefranche-sur-Mer, which is not a big city at all. It had its own Picard. I mean, and then Nice had its Picard. So they're all over the place.
Louviers, where I lived for 30 years, is a town of 20,000. It has its own Picard.
Yeah.
It doesn't bode well, I would say. But if you have to do it, it's very high quality. It's not like a frozen pizza from the grocery store.
Okay. And then switching gears just a little bit now, the story of the French fishmonger. I thought that was one of my favorite parts of the book so far. It was just fascinating. It was inspiring. For you to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning to start the day with them at 3 a.m. and spend the entire 12 or 13 hours with them. what were your biggest takeaways from that experience? Can you tell us more about it? And I'm curious if you're still doing business with Bruno and his team.
Well, Bruno has become a very good friend of mine, so I imagine we will always be friends. But my first book I wrote was called The Great American Seafood Cookbook, and I went fishing with commercial fishermen all over the U.S. So, for me to get up at 2 a.m. is that's like one of the best, most fun things I can think about doing, especially when I'm hanging out with people in the fish business, because they are raw. I mean, they are, if they're fishermen, they're actually hunting a wild species. If they're fishmongers, they are living a hard life. It's cold, it's wet. They never know if they're going to get what they ordered. So, I just found this guy who was at my market, and, he's happy all the time and making jokes all the time. And I just thought, I want to find out what's behind all this. And what's behind it all is he loves his job. And I'm telling you, it's scallop season right now. Now we're heading into spring, so it's nicer, but in scallop season, freezing cold, and they have to open scallops for their customers. And it might be below zero. And they've got, I just don't even know how they do it. But I loved that day, and the closer I can get to fish, the better.
And so you spent like I said, 13 hours with them. Were you exhausted at the end of the day, or were you high energy at the end of the day? I'm curious.
I probably was. I mean, I don't really think of it that way, because, we're moving around, we're driving all over the place in the middle of the night, and then we're at the market, and I'm like hearing all these stories, and there are 20 dramas a minute when you're selling food at the market. And so I probably wasn't tired. I was probably pretty excited, because it's exciting, And then what's really hilarious, and I found this on fishing boats too, here they are surrounded with beautiful fish. Like, we could have opened a scallop and eaten it raw. They go to the cafe and they have pate, sausages, bread, and butter and beer for breakfast.
Well, maybe being around the seafood all day, they needed a change. Yeah. No, I thought that was a really great story. I clung to every moment of that. Now, switching to a different animal altogether, can you explain why you think rabbits, in the book, you talked about how rabbits should be in the kitchen, not only for flavor, but also for politics. I thought that was fascinating.
Well, I'm very, I really make it a point to teach people how to cook rabbit. And I will say that Americans who make up the bulk of my students are very reluctant at times because of I think it's Beatrix Potter. We really humanize anthropomorphize much, but rabbit meat is gorgeous. Rabbits are light on the land. They're herbivores. They breed like rabbits. They're very lean meat. There are only 2 spots on a rabbit where there's fat. So to me, it just seems like a perfect meat to take pressure off of beef, and to maybe even take some pressure off of chicken. And if you cook it gently, I have a recipe in the book for rabbit with sorrel, and it's basically it's kind of a template recipe, like many of the recipes here. If you can't get rabbit, use chicken. But, you do this recipe. If you don't have sorrel, you add spinach. If you don't have white wine, you add water. You can just mix and match. It braises for less than 30 minutes, and you have a gorgeous meal on your hands. And I just wish people would, same with seafood, but I would love for eaters and cooks to expand their repertoire, because we focus on so few ingredients, really. We are led to focus on so few ingredients.
And can you explain why in the French supermarket anyway, or the food stores, you're going to find the rabbit next to the chicken?
Well, if you ever set foot on a French farm, you know about the basse-cour, which is the farmyard. So historically, the basse-cour was where the pig was raised, the chickens and the rabbits, and that was the province of the farm wife. So she would take care of all these animals, and when it was time for her to go kill a rabbit, she would do that and bring it in, serve for dinner. And the rabbits and the chickens were always in the same place, so they don't have their own category. They're definitely not a four-hoofed creature, so they are linked with poultry.
That's a great explanation. Thank you. I love the story also of Antoine Auguste Parmentier and the potato and its origin in cooking in France. I had never heard that story. How did you find gems like that? And could you explain that one a little bit for us?
Because I learned to cook in France, I learned very early on that anything with the word Parmentier in it was linked to the potato. And I knew the bare bones of the story, but then to research for this class I was teaching, he was a pharmacist and he was a prisoner of war in Germany. And he learned to eat the potato and to respect the potato, but of course it wasn't in France. So he went on a one-person campaign to bring the potato to France for its nutritional value. And he was very creative and quite the publicity hound. So he wanted to rub, shoulders with the king. So he was invited to something, there are always these big gaps in legends that I love, like who called him? Who invited him? But he showed up at this banquet with a bouquet of potato flowers, which he stuck in the king's lapel and in the queen's headdress. And then he got the king to agree to let him and his workers plant potatoes, some say along the Champs-Élysées, some saying, outside of Paris, but the Champs-Élysées was outside of Paris. So let's just say there. And those plants were guarded during the day, heavily guarded. And at night, the guards all went home. And this was a ploy to get people to come steal the potatoes at night. And they cooked them and loved them. And that is how the potato arrived in France. Now, you could poke a million holes in the story, but why would you? Because it's such a great story.
And then here's one of the dishes where you use a potato in the book. It just seemed such a classic, and that's where you explain the story, I think, of Parmentier. It was fascinating.
Well, anytime you see a dish with the word Parmentier in it, it will include potatoes, and he really is considered the father of the potato in France.
Can you imagine French cuisine without the potato?
No. But I mean, the potato is beloved, and you have to try the mashed potatoes in the book. They are simple, but they're so good. And the secret, well, there's a secret.
Okay. And then in the book, you described 6 different types of labels. In fact, it was at the beginning of the book. And the only one I had ever heard of was the AOC because of its connection to wine. And so you explained that the labels are valuable for assessing whether a food product was produced in a certain region or of a certain quality or produced using a traditional process. 6 different labels. So how do you use those labels when you go shopping?
That's such a good question, Linda. And I put the labels in there because it really speaks to the chauvinism, the pride, really. It is pure pride that the French have about their foodstuffs. So when I go to the grocery store, you see things, well, I don't shop at the grocery store a lot. I shop more at the market to buy, but if you go to the grocery store, you see Label Rouge and you see AOP and you see all these labels. There are different gradations of quality. And AOP, which used to be AOC, Appellation d'Origine Protégée, means that a food product has to be raised in a specific geographical area according to specific protocol. And to get an AOP for a food, it takes years and files and paperwork and begging and pleading and probably bribing. I don't know. But the Piment d'Espelette is an example I witnessed because I was interviewing growers of the famous pepper from the Basque Country, and they were working on their AOP. The woman who was the head of working on brought out her list of papers that she said, this is what I have to give to prove that we plant them at a certain time on a certain day. And, it's all very about producing a product that people can count on regarding its quality. Mm-hmm. So it's all about, assuring the customer that if you buy this labeled product, you'll get the best that label promises.
Mm-hmm. Now, Susan, I think you might have discussed this at your presentation here in 2015, but it seemed to me that there was some discussion of how some products in France are in fact very close to organic or bio, but they're not labeled as such because of the bureaucracy that's involved.
Much, and I think the same might be true in other countries, but in France we have and I've really changed my mind about bio being organic. we have a category called culture raisonnée, which means, translates loosely as sustainable agriculture. So what that means is that if a grower needs to treat a field or a product to prevent it from dying, to prevent him or her from losing money and going under, they treat. But what farmers here, they don't, you know, I'm talking about small farmers. There's lots of industrial agriculture here. But small growers don't want to treat. The treatments are too expensive. Plus customers in France, I mean, they're becoming rabidly organic, desiring of either organic or culture raisonnée. And so a farmer does not have to, if they do culture raisonnée, they don't have a label. They just talk to their customers about it. For organic, they need a lot of paperwork. And people are a little suspicious of the organic label. You know, they're worried it's not true. So it's almost better to not have that label.
Interesting. So I think we have a good idea now of you know, of where you're going with the current book. Can you tell us about other projects that you have coming forward?
Well, this book has, you know, it spawned a lot of ideas. And then of course we got caught in the grip of not being able to go outside. So I decided with a friend to create a new project called Dancing Tomatoes. And that's the name of a website, dancingtomatoes.com. And we launched a YouTube channel because I can't teach, you know, there are no live bodies to teach. So I'm teaching online, and it's, what it is a culture, cuisine, ethical kind of thing where I'm really doing the type of classes I did at home, but I'm doing them on YouTube, and we'll soon have a course to offer. And our idea is to make cooking, to bring the secrets of cooking into people's kitchens and make it fun and lively, and take them sometimes to places in Paris and introduce them eventually to people who are involved. So we've interviewed, I interviewed Marie Quatrom, her daughter Nathalie. She's one of the most famous cheese affineurs in Paris. I interviewed Thierry, I can't remember his last name, but he's a wine merchant, a sommelier. You know, and I want people to feel like they're here with me in my adventures. So it's brand new. It's brand new, but it is what I see for the future, because as we all know, in any time, what we have is today. We don't know what's coming. Mm-hmm. And I'm having a ball doing it.
Oh, this is great. So this is a brand new venture. And how does it tie in with On Rue Tatin, or is On Rue Tatin a format that you're not continuing?
Well, you know, I moved out of my house at On Rue Tatin once my kids went away to school. I waited a little while, and I think, you know, I've really turned over, I'm really entering a new chapter. And I think On Rue Tatin, my book is still selling quite well. And I don't, you know, there's so much uncertainty, but right now I'm focusing on Dancing Tomatoes. That is what I'm doing now. That is, I believe, could become my new identity. I won't turn into a dancing tomato, but it's really what I was doing at En Rue Tatin, but it's virtual. And it's, you know, I'm trying to make people have as much fun as we had in those classes together without being together.
And the dancingtomatoes.com is up and running, and
yeah, it's up and running, and we're, you know, we publish 3 videos a week, and we'll soon have a course, an entire cooking course. And, you know, with my classes in Normandy, I always took people to markets and introduced them to as many French people as I could, because my students were very sophisticated and wanted to go deeper into the culture. And that is what I'm doing with Dancing Tomatoes, because I feel that way too. I want to share what I know. So I'm trying to bring people along with me.
I think that sounds really cool. I can't wait to dive into the website a little bit more.
Plate du jour.
Now, Melissa, I think we're caught up with our, did I skip any? Let me know if I skipped any of the questions that we planned to talk about, but I think we're caught up with the questions that we had prepared. We do have a couple questions, great questions here from our audience, and we would encourage everyone to put your questions in the chat, because we have time for those now. One of them I see here is from Bernard Voss, And he is asking, is cooking flour in France different from common flour in the United States?
Oh my goodness, someone, not me, could probably write a book. Yes, it is. And it's funny, I was just thinking about it today because I use, it's called farine type 45, which relates to germ content and everything. So totally different because the flour in the US is made with hard wheat. So it has a lot more gluten in it. And it has even a lot more gluten in it. Because the varieties bred for industrial production have been bred with a lot of gluten because we like our bread airy and foofy and everything. So I recommend using, I call it crappy flour, bleached all-purpose flour when you're making French pastry. You want as little gluten in there as you can. So you need highly processed flour, not for making bread, but pastries. If you're going to make croissant, if tarts, all that, you want a crisp, lovely, light, you're not after nutrition when you're doing that.
Interesting. And then another similar question. You talk about salts in the book. Can you share your opinion on salts?
Oh my God, there we have another book. I love salt, and every class I teach has a salt tasting. And if anybody can help me figure out how to do this virtually so it'll mean something, I will take suggestions. But I'm a devotee of sea salt, and I have been for 800 years. I do love the sel de Guérande because I have reported on that industry a lot, and it is truly artisanal. Truly, that salt is evaporated seawater. And I think that when we cook, that salt is actually an ingredient. It's a noble ingredient. And so you want to add the best salt you can. And I am not saying this from a snob angle. I'm saying it from a flavor quality angle. And I think Oregon produces probably some sea salt. So, you know, I taste sea salt everywhere I go. Guérande is my favorite. There's one from Australia, from the Murray River, that I love. And there are millions of them. So I highly counsel using sea salt. And if you're going to bake a chicken in a salt crust or a fish, I would allow kosher salt, you know, just in case you need my permission. But as a fine salt, it has that, it's a pretty industrial product.
Okay. I'm looking in the chat to see if we have any other questions. Melissa, do you have any questions on your end? Okay. And then Vilma Mendez is asking, what is the name of the salt?
It's sel de Guérande, and I'll spell it. It's Guerande. And that Guérande is a small village on the southern coast of Brittany, and it's right across the channel from Noirmoutier. So sel de Noirmoutier, it's from basically the same water, and it's salt that comes out, that it's basically, it is truly evaporated seawater, and it's evaporated in these salt marshes that the Romans built. You know, the Romans came here in BC, AD 19, I think it was. Anyway, no, I don't know. Anyway, Julius Caesar and the Romans, and they were all over France, and they built these salt marshes, and they're the same ones. They are the same ones that have been kept steadily producing, except during the 2 world wars when people were otherwise occupied. And the salt from there is just fabulous. You can find it in the US, but go local. See if you can find a local sea salt.
And then up in the chat, I'll just parrot some of the things that are in there. Barbara asked about what is the name of the Australian salt? And then someone else has chimed in that in Netarts, Oregon, we have great Josephson Sea Salt.
I'd love to try it. I actually haven't tried it, but I'm sure it's worth trying, and you always want to support your local producer. The salt from Australia is from the Murray River, Murray. It's a beautiful pale orange salt. And it's a really interesting story, by the way, because the river, you know, emptied into the sea, but the sea started coming up the river. So the farmers there could no longer use it to irrigate. And they just said, well, life gives you lemons. What are we going to do with this? So they started harvesting sea salt.
Well, that's a great story. From Josette. Josette, do you want to come on camera and ask your question?
Mais oui.
So Melissa, can you allow Josette to unmute herself? C'est possible. Hey, Josette, are you there?
Hi, can you see me?
No, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Susan. Thanks for being with us today. I was just wondering, what staples do you recommend we have in our kitchen to always be prepared to cook an impromptu French dinner?
To whip out an impromptu, you gotta have eggs because you can whip out an omelet. And oh, that's a tough question. But eggs, butter, flour, sugar, good salts. It always helps to, a French person would always have grated Gruyere cheese in their refrigerator. It's called râpé. And when you go to the fishmonger, you just order râpé, and râpé means grated. So that goes in a quiche or on a pizza or you can mix that in anywhere. And I often have a little pot of cream in my refrigerator too, because you can make a gratin and add some cream to it. So in the book, I have a list of essentials, and they do include edible flowers, but that's up to everybody who has a garden. And I can see some questions here too.
Oh, sure. You've got one from Angela. Is there a way to make creme fraiche here? It is hard to find.
Oh, absolutely. You take whole milk and buttermilk and you mix them together and let them sit in a warmish place overnight. And the proportions you could probably find online. I for sure published them in every single book I wrote until this one. So you could check any one of my books and you'd find a recipe for creme fraiche. And then there is a creamery in Vermont, at least in one that I know of that makes it. And if you can get it at Whole Foods.
Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, we've got quite a few new questions in here. Feel free to pick any out that you like. And now I see one. Is there a key? Oh, no, sorry. What are the miniature light cream puffs often served in the viennoiserie in Paris?
Well, there's something called a chouquette. And I think that it's a cream puff. And it's got the big, what do they call it? The big sugar little grains on top of it. I can't think of the name, but that's an after school snack. So what I love about chouquette is they come out in the morning, but they always come out hot after school, because kids get out of school and they always have a goûter, a snack. And especially in an urban setting, but even in the town where I lived, the parents, you'd walk by the bakery and get your child 100 grams of a chouquette, which is like 8, and that would be their snack.
Oh, that's great. Well, then for our folks here in Portland, Oregon, we know we have the best chouquettes probably in the United States, because we have a meilleur ouvrier de France, Dominique Jolin.
Wow.
He has a boulangerie, and the chouquettes are among his favorites.
Oh my God, a good chouquette is a thing of beauty, truly.
Yeah, we're very lucky. Let's see, let's see. Is there a key to plat du jour, like a protein, a vegetable, and a starch? Is there a
good question? The French tend to be devoted to their protein. So a plat du jour will tend to revolve around meat or fish, and fish will be often on Friday, because this used to be a Catholic country. So, but more and more people are eating more and more people are eating less and less meat. So there often will be a vegetarian option. So a plat du jour, you might have 2 choices or 3, and then you eat it with the formula. And the other thing about plat du jour is budget. They're always much less expensive than anything else on the menu. And that's because that chef is like that farm wife, and it's seasonal, local, and whatever's abundant.
That's great. And some are asking the name of the bakery in Portland. It's Saint-Honoré Bakery.
Oh, I know Saint-Honoré. Where's that located though? Remind me.
There's one on Northwest Thurman, and then there's now one on Broadway as well.
Right. Well, good.
And Lake Oswego, and I think 5 locations total.
And is it open now? Is it open now?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Everybody should run to them.
Yeah, that takes us back. Now, the on Rue Tatin in Normandy, somebody was asking, is that so that's not available right now? And then after COVID, do you think, well, just tell us, I know we're almost running out of time here, Susan, but I know that a lot of our audience would like to know what's your experience of living in Paris during this pandemic?
Oh my gosh. Well, I landed here about 2 months before the big old lockdown last March, and I was very grateful to be in a city. Very grateful to be in Paris where there wasn't a car on the streets. Now we're in another lockdown of sorts. We can't, I don't know if anybody's seen the graphic of the gate in the middle of a road where you can go around it on all sides. That's kind of what we're doing right now. You can't go through it, but you can go around it. But I was out on my bicycle today, and there just is no traffic. So honestly, aside from my heartbreaking for all the small shops that are closed, everything in my life, all the food shops are open. Restaurants are closed, cafes are closed. None of us have been out for a meal in 850 years. But you can do what's called click and collect. You can order and then go pick up your food or have it delivered. And that is a very lively business. But I have to hand it to the French. There are a whole lot of clandestine restaurants going on. Don't tell anybody, but I have one downstairs from my apartment.
That sounds clandestine restaurants, because the restaurants are still 100% closed.
100,000% closed.
Oh, wow.
Until at least June.
Of course, things here in the States depend on the region, but here in our area, we've had 50% capacity now for 2 weeks, and it's
bravo. We're dying to go out. We can't really go to each other's houses, and some of us, so we don't, but some of us do sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people have to live, right? But we're careful. People are careful.
Yeah. Well, all we can do, all of us, is hope that this will be over sooner than later. We did have a couple questions in the chat about the availability of notes from this seminar or from this session today. And we will have a recording of the event up probably on Monday on our YouTube channel. So anybody can visit it there. I have a question from Mary Herman that I have to say I don't exactly understand. What is French for click and collect? Does that ring a bell with you?
That's a really great question. It is click and collect.
But I don't know. So that's the translation? It's click and...
Honestly, it's click and collect. And the beauty of this particular confinement is bookstores are open. Libraries are open. During our very first lockdown, serious, no bookstores, no florists. I mean, I almost felt like that was the cruelest part because, the French without fresh flowers and the French without books. I mean, it was serious, but now we've got the niceties back. And, we'll get through it.
Yeah. And so there's been some discussion, I don't know if you've heard it, but is the bees gone for good?
No way. I mean, come on, if you love your friends, you love your friends, right? And the French, I mean, the bees is, to an American or an Anglo-Saxon, I mean, we're huggers. The bees is already like not even, it's fake kissing. Mm-hmm. So you just do the cheek thing, then I'm sure it will come back. I'm sure it will. I mean, it has to.
Yeah. And then I know you can't know any of these answers for certain.
Oh, but I can make them up. I'm really good at that.
Then we have the Mermans asking, how soon do you think that regular folks in Paris will be able to get their vaccinations?
Oh, in Paris? Oh, yeah. Man, they're on it. They're on it. You can almost see the steam engine bringing in those doses. It's supposed to, it cracks me up though, because it's like 1 foot forward, 1 step forward, 12 steps back. But we're supposed to get a huge delivery next week. And it's, according to Macron, it's going to, everybody's going to get, and now everybody's going to get vaccinated. And now the age is down to 70 with no health. Anybody over 70 can get a vaccination. And there are all kinds of, another word for astuce in French is tuyau. So it's like a little, I don't know, tuyau is like a way to get around the rules, kind of. There are millions of those. So I was vaccinated already. Through a tuyau that my neighbor told me, you just go sign up at the pharmacy. It wasn't very complicated. But they called me right away. Yeah.
No, that's funny. Yeah, because actually the same thing is happening here in Oregon. Most everybody I know that wants to be, well, everyone wants to be vaccinated, but a lot of people are getting through to the sign up system with little tips and secret links that get mailed to you.
That is the definition of life in France. You have to have secret links. You have to have tips, astuces, and then you have to know people.
And then what kind of vaccines are available? Is it the same as we have here, Pfizer, Moderna, and you've got the AstraZeneca.
We've got AstraZeneca, which is the big one, and that's the one I got, and I did not have thrombosis. You know, there's a lot of bad press about AstraZeneca, and there's a lot of talk about it being political. I could care less. You know, it's just like, I'm not a vaccine person. I don't really like the idea, but it's like, let's just get this over with so we can all breathe. You know, and you know, I have to hand it, like my little neighbor here who I adore, she had a big party the other night and the cops came, and I just, the whole thing is like, people hid in the bedroom and people hid under the bed and nobody got a fine, and it's just like, oh God, crazy.
Okay. Thank you so much for allowing us to segue just a little bit into the current day situation in Paris. I know it doesn't relate terribly much to your cookbook, but we appreciate your, from the, you know, in the trenches view of what's happening in Paris. We're just about out of time. So if anybody has any burning questions, here's your last chance to put those into the chat. Also, I'd like to invite Sabine Wild, if you're still with us in the session today, to take yourself off mute and say hi. It doesn't look like we have any other questions. So you know what, Melissa, I think you could. Oh, here we go. A really good question. Really good. Is your cookbook available everywhere? Where is your cookbook available?
The nice person, I always forget to say anything about it. But yes, it's available through any brick and mortar store, which first off, second of all, it is available online everywhere. And I did want to say that even though we talked about current events a little bit, I want to say it does come back to Plat du Jour, because the Plat du Jour is alive and well. And when you go, everybody has their menus outside the restaurants. And when you do your click and collect, you can order a Plat du Jour. And I just think it's wonderful. I have to say the spirit of the French chef, it has been astonishing. I think they all deserve the Légion d'honneur. I do, because they have kept people very happy.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good point.
And it's all heartwarming food. It's all the food you want. I mean, the recipes in this book, they warm your heart and they fill your stomach and they make you feel like you're happy and warm. And that's the idea.
Wow, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and take everybody off mute and allow the audience to show their appreciation. We really thank everybody for coming here today, and merci beaucoup to Susan for this presentation.
Merci. Thank you. It's delightful to see you all. Thank you. Thanks, Mary. Mary's my sister.
Great. So you're recognizing. Great.
Yeah.
All right. Merci beaucoup.
My mom's out there. Hi, Mom.
Merci, Susan. Merci.
Thank you very much. Very interesting.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Linda.
Okay. Thank you,
Linda.
Okay.
Thanks,
merci,
Linda.
Melissa. Oh, there's Sabine. Hi, Sabine.
Hi, Sabine. Et s'il vous plaît, donnez-vous à votre fille.
Oui, d'accord. Et je vois votre mère souvent, mais elle a déménagé maintenant.
Bah oui, mais ça va mieux pour elle quand même. Bah, elle m'a dit que vous l'avez appelée. C'est chouette.
Oui, oui, oui. Et bravo, bravo.
Merci,
bravo.
bon courage.
Merci.
Au revoir, Sabine.
Au revoir.
Bravo.
Merci, Linda.
Merci, au revoir tout le monde.
Merci, Linda.
Au revoir. Merci beaucoup.